Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. Today we're looking at the MT3 earphones made by a company called Simgot out of China. And these earphones are essentially a budget offering, but they've got some pretty interesting design features and a great sound as well. So let's take a look. I'm not going to do a full unboxing video here, but I did want to show you the retail packaging that the MT3s come in. And the branding on here is actually Meeture, M-E-E-T-U-R-E. So just be aware of that. It is the product I'm talking about. So if you do see this around, this is the MT3 made by Simgot. And the reason that's important is that Simgot's the same brand that have brought out the EN700 Pro, which has got quite a following and is a fantastic earphone in its own right. So when you open up the box of the MT3s, you get a number of things, but the most important thing here that I want to talk about now is the earphones themselves. You can probably see here they're designed very similarly to most custom in-ear monitors, and that means they're a really comfortable fit. They're beautifully designed for something that is such a budget offering. I was really impressed when I got them out of the box and had a bit of a look at them, and then even more impressed when I had a listen, but I'll get to that shortly. So the MT3s retail for $75.99 US on Amazon, and I'll put a link below if you're interested in these. Once you hear what I have to say about them, you can jump straight through and buy them through the link. But they're, as I said before, a fairly budget offering. $75.99 is a very affordable pair of in-ear monitors, particularly with the quality that you've got in terms of both the physical design and manufacture of the earphones, but also the sound quality that they're able to put out. Now let's talk quickly about accessories. The MT3s come with two sets of silicone tips, and there's three different sizes in each set. Type 1 ear tips are designed to give you extra clarity, whereas Type 2 are designed to give you a bit of extra bass. Now at first I wasn't sure how they were achieving this, and I wasn't sure if it was just a gimmick, but I can tell you they really do work, and the reason they work is what they've done is they've changed the size of the bore, the hole, through the middle of the actual ear tip. What that means, if you get a smaller bore, you tend to get better bass response. If you get a larger bore, you get more enhanced treble. So you can literally tune, and it's only subtle, but you can literally tune the sound of the MT3s just by changing their ear tips. The other thing that's included is this beautiful cable. The cable itself is a beautifully braided, oxygen-free copper cable, really nicely made, excellent quality plugs, excellent quality splitter where it splits off into the two different earpieces. Really everything you could want about it is fantastic. The one thing that I've got mixed feelings around is the connection to the actual earpiece itself. It's a very traditional 2-pin connection. One thing I both like and don't like about it is they've modified the 2-pin design so that the socket itself sticks out of the earphone, and then there's a recessed section inside the plug that allows for the pins to be protected. Now, as I've just said, the whole point of this is to protect the pins from being damaged and bent. So from that point of view, it's really good. The drawback of that is that you can't just go and buy any other aftermarket cable to connect to the Simgots. This is true for one of their higher models, but it's different from the EN700 Pro. My only real concern, I guess, is that if somebody broke their cable and had to replace it, the only option is to go back through Simgot and buy a Simgot cable. That said, unless you're really knocking around the earphones, there's no reason the cable's going to break because it's a high quality cable. And at that price, there's no reason you wouldn't just go and buy another pair. So I don't think it's a big deal, but it's something that I did want to point out. Now, the final thing I wanted to mention was the carry case they provide. It's this little mesh case. It's sort of semi-transparent, it's nice and soft, it's a little bit padding and protecting, and it's fine. It's not the best case I've ever seen, but it's perfectly okay, and at this price you really can't complain too much. Now this pair that I've got here is in the dark grey colour, but there are 5 colours available, and what changes when you get a different colour is the plastic parts of the shell. So there's this little metal insert which is always silver, there's the metal tube, which is always gold, it's an aluminium oxide, and then the casing around it is the part that actually changes colour. So I've already mentioned it's designed like a custom in-ear monitor. It's got this beautiful sort of teardrop type shape which will fit really nicely inside the ear cavity. It's also got a really nice use of metal in the tube that carries the sound into your ear. My experience with earphones that use metal tubes is that they almost always sound better than those with plastic. I don't understand the acoustics behind it. It just seems to produce a clearer, cleaner sound. Maybe there's less distortion or reflections, I'm not sure. but I really liked the level of quality that you can see in the design of the MT3. I have fairly tricky ears for the fitting of universal earphones, and I often struggle to get a really good seal and a really comfortable fit. So the first thing I'm often interested in when I get a pair of earphones like the MT3s is how well they're going to fit into my ears, whether they're going to be comfortable, whether they stay there. And I have to tell you that these are extremely comfortable. They are as comfortable as any other universal I've worn. I'm not going to go so far as to say they're more comfortable, but they are as comfortable as any universal earphone I've ever worn. The tip selection is good in terms of the sizes available. It's soft, so it makes a good seal, and the physical shape of the shell sits really nicely in my ear, and the angle of the nozzle, which is really important, is just right as well. So given that I've got fairly picky ears that are quite difficult to fit, I think almost everybody will find the MT3s to be an extremely comfortable option. So let's talk a bit about the audio design of the MT3s. They're quite interesting in the fact that they use a single dynamic driver, and whilst on its own that's not unique, what is unusual is that it's exactly the same driver as Simgot use in their much more expensive EN700 Pro earphones. So I was very interested to understand what was Simgot's rationale in using a driver from a much more expensive earphone to essentially give the same potential performance to a lower priced earphone. As it turns out, the driver in the MT3, whilst the same as the EN700 Pro, has been tuned differently. So the shape of the housing, the positioning of the driver, and the use of special acoustic filters around the driver or in front of the driver have changed the sound compared to the EN700 Pro. You can tell they're from the same lineage, but the tuning is definitely different. Some people are going to actually prefer the MT3, whilst others will prefer the EN700 Pro, and that to me is quite interesting. In terms of sound quality, the MT3 is a very warm, engaging, quite bass-oriented earphone, but it's not thick or slow. It's got a really good sense of clarity and drive to it, but it is definitely bass-oriented. So only look at these if you're into bass earphones, but if you do enjoy your bass, these are going to be really enjoyable for you. And at the price, the balance between bass and clarity is really impressive. Normally you've got to spend a whole lot more money to get a well-tuned bass-oriented earphone. So these are really impressive in that regard. The treble is clean and it's detailed, but it feels like it's a little bit muted. Now, the MT3s apparently are rated for high-res audio, and what that means is that for a headphone or an earphone to be rated for high-res audio, it has to have a frequency response that extends to 40,000 Hertz. So normal human hearing extends from 20 to 20,000 Hertz. These, to be high-res certified, double that top end. They also go all the way down to 15 Hertz. So they've got a really broad range. But as I listen to it, the treble sounds like it's a little bit muted. So yeah, it might extend to 40,000 Hertz, but it's not crisp and detailed all the way up. That's not a bad thing. It's just worth knowing that just because something can hit 40K doesn't mean that it's in exactly a straight line balance with the mids and the bass throughout that frequency range. In the case of the MT3 though, what this leads to is a really enjoyable smooth treble, a slightly laid back treble, but still good detail. The only nitpick that I'd have with the treble on these is that cymbals and similar percussion type instruments can sometimes not sound 100% natural compared to, say, even the EN700 Pro, which has got a little bit more clarity in the top end. But again, I'm picking minor things here just to point out the differences. Overall, the treble's really nice. It's just a little bit relaxed and a little bit laid back compared to neutral or compared to a clear, bright, sparkling sort of sound that some people enjoy. Now the mid-range on the MT3 is a little bit different to the treble in the sense that it's very smooth, it's very clean, but it's got a little bit of extra upper mid-range energy. So where the treble is a little bit laid back, the mids have got a little bit of extra clarity in there just from what sounds like a little upper mid-range hump. And to me, it's an enjoyable tuning. It adds a bit of extra clarity and texture to the mid-range, so I do enjoy that. It's just an interesting contrast compared to the treble. Now onto the bass. The bass is where the MT3s really shine. They are incredibly good at producing tight, strong, powerful bass. And at the price point that they sit, it's amazing that they're tuned as well as they are and perform as well as they are. They're not the last word in tightness and speed, but they're extremely good at balancing speed and power and fullness of the bass. So in certain tracks like say Beck's Waking Light, They can overemphasize things like a kick drum and make the kick drum sound a bit bigger, maybe a little bit looser than it's meant to, but they're not actually loose within themselves, if that makes sense. If they have a tight bass line, it'll still sound tight and punchy. But when things start to get a bit loose, they can actually overemphasize that just ever so slightly and produce a slightly fuller and perhaps slightly slower sounding bass. Slower in terms of the decay, so that the attack's still nice and punchy and sharp, but the bass probably hangs around a millisecond or two longer because of that extra weight and power that comes behind it. There's no doubt in my mind that you'd have to refer to the MT3s as a bass forward or a bass emphasized earphone, and that tuning's not going to suit everybody. But as I said a moment ago, if you do enjoy R&B, hip hop, rap, anything that requires a strong bass, you're really going to enjoy the MT3s. A great example, one of my test tracks is Chunky by Bruno Mars, and the bass output from the MT3s on Chunky is just fantastic. It's strong, it's driving, it's punchy, and it gives a real sense of rhythm to the music that's for me at least, highly enjoyable. The sound staging and imaging from the MT3s really surprised me. Often a bass-oriented headphone gets a bit of a kind of a one blob sound in the middle of the soundstage right in front of you, but the MT3s do a really good job. Again, they're not the end word in clarity and separation, but they're far better than I expected them to be. They are very good at creating a nice spacious soundstage. They position instruments really well throughout the soundstage. Overall, they're really impressive, particularly given their bass emphasis. One of the things that makes them particularly good in this area is their coherency. By using only a single dynamic driver, they're able to produce sound that is perfectly coherent across all frequencies. So you don't have the issue of multi-driver earphones sometimes producing different sounds with slightly different placement within the soundstage. Because it's all coming from a single driver in the MT3, everything's laid out perfectly, and they do produce a really nice sort of semicircular soundstage that's both coherent, so everything fits together, but also fairly well spaced out, and I'd go so far as saying extremely well spaced out for an earphone in this price range. Now I've got a few comparisons here just to help you put in perspective just how good the MT3s are. First up here, I've got the Shozzy Zero. So the Shozzy Zero is quite a different style of earphone. It's more of a bullet style design, so it's just a single peg that sticks into your ear, but it's once again a single dynamic driver, so it's very comparable. In terms of price, these retail for about $60 US, and so they're just a little bit cheaper than the MT3s, but in my opinion, you're getting a lot more for your money with the MT3s. You've got detachable cables, you've got the beautiful in-ear style design, like a custom monitor. The cable quality, I think, is slightly better on the MT3s, at least in terms of durability. And the biggest thing for me is that you've got a driver that's made of metal, or at least it's metallized plastic. And that's really important because when you put something like the Zeros into your ear, you actually hear the driver crinkling. And that crinkling sounds really plastic, it sounds really cheap, and for me it's always been the biggest drawback with the Zeros, which are great earphones in their own right, but it's always been something I've been uncomfortable with. The overall sound of the Zeros is probably less enhanced than the MT3, so it hasn't got that bass hump in the same way. It's probably more neutral overall. But interestingly, I found that listening to the Zeros, I always knew I was listening to a recording. It always, something about the sound and the tuning just reminded me it was a recording. Whereas with the MT3s, I could actually lose myself in the recording and not be thinking about the fact that this was just a reproduction. With the Zeros, I feel like I'm almost always aware that it's a reproduction. A very good reproduction, but a reproduction. Because of the more neutral tuning, the Zeros probably have a slightly better definition in their image, so they place things just a little bit better, but the soundstage is stretched very wide and it's not very deep. And that to me is part of that whole, this is a recording type sound versus the more live and lifelike sound of the MT3s. Probably the only edge that I would give to the Zeros over the MT3s is that these don't have quite that same enhanced bass. So on some tracks, the bass from the MT3 is just a touch too much. Say an acoustic track with a kick drum in it, sometimes the kick drum just gets a bit overpowering, but it's only a few tracks that happens, it's not a big deal, and it's still, for me, an easy win for the MT3 out of this comparison. So let's look now at another strong competitor for the MT3s, and that's the Shure SE215s. These are a long-standing, highly recommended earphone. They come from a very strong brand in Shure and are also a single driver design. Once again, similar to the MT3s, we've got a design that's reminiscent of customs. They're not quite as molded as a custom earphone and the MT3s, but they're a really nice ergonomic fit, and Shure have for a long time been one of my favorite universal styles because of the way they just fit snugly in the ear. The SE215 retails for about $75, so they're right on par with the MT3 and therefore a really direct competitor. A couple of things that the Shures have going for them. They use the MCX connector, which rather than a 2-pin is a coaxial style connector. So you've got a middle pin and an outer ring that does the earth or the negative path. And they also swivel really nicely on the end of that connector. So it's a really good option in that regard. It means you can buy lots of aftermarket cables. So in that sense, I'd give the edge to the SE215 purely because of the cable, but there's nothing wrong essentially with the cable from the MT3. I just prefer the MCX connection. So the SE215 has a sound that's got a little bit more upper mid and lower treble energy, and that leads to the sound being a little bit grainy at times. It enhances the texture in the sound a little bit, but at the expense of that smooth, easy to listen to sound. It can sound a bit unnatural and even a little bit tinny sometimes, depending on the recording. What really impressed me was how much better the MT3 was in the imaging and the soundstage. So normally an earphone that's got more treble or upper mid energy is going to produce a better, sharper image. And yet the MT3s clearly did a better job in this regard. The SE215s are great, the MT3s are just exceptional for the price range that we're talking about here. So it was a fairly easy win for me. If I was reaching for one over the other, I'd be reaching for the MT3s every time and dealing with that little bit of over-enhanced bass for the sake of everything else that it brings. Particularly when you can change the tips and put the wider bore treble tips on there to get the extra balance between the bass and the treble. Now I've got one final comparison that is not about the price because it's looking at the EN700 Pro, which is a much more expensive earphone and is made by the same company. So the reason I wanted to share this with you was because if you're looking at the Simgot MT3, you might be thinking, well, am I getting the same thing as the EN700 Pro? Is it worth spending the extra money, etc.? So I wanted to answer that question for you. In terms of cable quality and connections, the cable quality from the EN700 Pro is a little bit better again than the MT3, but they're both fantastic. The pin design on the EN700 Pro is the old traditional 2-pin, so it has the pins sticking out of the actual cable and a recessed 2-pin socket on the actual earphone itself. So that makes for a much easier change of cables if you do want to get aftermarket cables, or if you break the first one, you can choose from all sorts of options. So that's a slight edge to the EN700 Pro. But more importantly, I wanted to talk about the sound quality of the two because they do both use the exact same driver. So I was really interested to know what the difference is between the two. So the EN700 Pro is tuned quite a bit brighter than the MT3. There's still really good bass response, but the treble is much cleaner and brighter right the way through the range. And it leads to just a laser sharp imaging from the EN700 Pro. And there's no way the MT3 can match that because of the extra bass and the way it's been tuned. Again, it's not to say the MT3s aren't fantastic, but I can see why you'd spend more money on the EN700 Pro if you wanted extra clarity. If you want a really fun, enjoyable bass monster, you'd still choose the MT3 every single time. So it all depends on what you're looking for. In fact, if you're familiar with the EN700 Pro, what you're getting with the MT3s is a smoothed off, laid back, extra bass, super fun version of the EN700 Pro. It's not going to go head to head with much higher priced earphones the way the EN700 Pro will, but it's really, really good as an enjoyable, fun earphone to listen to. So in summary, the MT3s have rapidly become my favorite budget earphone. And to put that into perspective, I've been using the Shozzy Zeros as my quick and easy, fun listening go-to. And I've been using the Shure SE215s as my more ergonomic and comfortable option. What the MT3s represent to me is the best of both worlds. They're comfortable and snug in the ear, they don't fall out, and they sound really fun. For those who don't enjoy a lot of bass, they might have too much, but for anybody else, particularly for those who enjoy a fun sound or listen to genres of music that need good, strong, but well-controlled bass, the MT3s are absolutely worth checking out. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button and have a think about subscribing. I've got 2 more reviews of Simgot earphones coming up, and one of them is going to include a giveaway of that set of earphones. So it'll be worth staying informed and keeping up to date with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, happy listening, and we'll see you next time here on Passion for Sound.